Hi students, welcome in for lesson 20. This will be your screencast for the week. Today I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. So in lesson 20, if you're on the yellow out board, I'm going to ask you to define these two vocabulary words using the screencast today. So you'll see definitions on my slideshow, but more importantly, you can just put definitions into your own words. Those are two words that I want you to understand the meaning of by the end of the week. So, lesson 20, the age of imperialism. Last week, we were looking at lesson 19, which was on the age of industrialization, which started in Great Britain, then spread to the rest of Europe, the United States, Russia, and Japan, all in the 1800s. One of the effects of industrialization is it leads Europeans and the United States alike to rush out and want to gain more colonies because we have these new factories, we have these new inventions that enable us to produce things faster and more cheaply than ever before. So Europeans start competing for markets and new sources of raw materials, primarily in Africa, but also in Southeast Asia. This week, we're going to be looking at European justifications for imperialism, and we're going to be going back to some source analysis that we started in semester one that I'd like to continue working on. So this political cartoon that you see on the screen, one of the things you might pick up on here is that this man is dressed like Uncle Sam, which represents the United States. Over here, we have a man that is representing Great Britain, and it looks like on their backs in these baskets, they are carrying all of these different colonial or indigenous peoples from different parts of the world. If you look at this very, very carefully, it looks like they are walking over these rocks, okay? These very difficult boulders to get over of ignorance, superstition, brutality, and vice. They are carrying them up the mountain, and at the top you can see this woman on the statue is representing the concept of civilization. So the message of this cartoon being that Great Britain and the United States are helping all of these colonial peoples advance or fast track themselves to civilization. So imperialism, what is imperialism? Here's a more formal definition that I'd like to read to you. Imperialism is a policy or ideology of extending rule over peoples and other countries, for extending political and economic access, power, and control through employing hard power, especially military force, but also soft power. When we talk about foreign policy or how nations employ their power abroad, we could talk about hard power or soft power. Hard power is really using military force, using violence, using fighting, using weapons, but soft power can be through diplomatic pressure. Sometimes even soft power can be through economic pressure that a nation can place on another nation in an effort to coerce them into a particular type of behavior. So what I want you to understand about imperialism is it's the idea of one country that's more powerful exerting control over another country that's weaker. Sometimes this is directly, they take over their territories very directly and they take over their governments. Sometimes it's just through economic control. There's different ways this can play out, but it's the idea of a stronger nation controlling a weaker nation. And in many of these examples that we're going to look at in this unit, we'll see are examples of direct territorial acquisition, where these nations will go in and actually take over the territory and the government. So what I'm showing you here on the map is two different pictures of Africa, one taken in 1880 and the other one in 1913. What this is showing you on the left is all of the different territories and kingdoms of Africa. So you can see there's the Sokoto Caliphate. You can see that there's the Congo. This looks like it's owned by France. Angola is owned by Portugal. Cape Colony is owned by Britain. You can see that there are some European colonies that have been established along the coast, but there's still quite a bit of African empires here kind of in the center. The Kingdom of Lunda, for example. Tipu Tip, the Kingdom of Luba, all of these are African-controlled countries. Well, within basically a period of 25, 30 years, all of Africa, with the exception of two places, Ethiopia and Liberia, will be colonized by Europeans. They hadn't been colonized prior to that because African cultures really were too strong in the interior of Africa to be conquered by Europeans. Europeans did try, but they failed early on. But with these new technologies of the Industrial Revolution, such as the train and better weapons, such as the machine gun, Europeans are going to finally have the power and the technology to conquer all of Africa, and they do that. So we'll be learning about that. Here's another look at what's going to happen to Africa very, very quickly. So this is Africa after the scramble. 1914. You can see the different colors of different European nations here. The British are represented in this kind of pinkish red color. So the British take over quite a bit of territory, as you can see. The French also take over a lot, particularly in West Africa. There's a lot of countries here in Africa still that speak French. You can see there's other German, Italian, Portuguese, and Belgian colonies as well. But by and large, the British and the French have the most of Africa. Okay. If we want to look at Africa today, these are current political boundaries of Africa on the right. So you can see that current political boundaries in many ways mirror the colonial boundaries that were set up by Europeans. Of course, we can see some more divisions. But in many ways, if you look at these two maps, you'll see that the divisions are similar, okay, to many of the divisions set up by Europeans. Now, why is this important? Because when Europe went in to colonize Africa, they didn't really pay much attention to the cultures on the ground. So what ended up happening is that nations were carved right through different ethnic tribals, different ethnicities and different tribes, excuse me. So this is a map showing you the different ethnic homelands of different African societies. You can see that there's tons of different ethnicities and different culture groups in Africa. But one of the problems that Africa has had to deal with in the modern era is that many of the boundaries of modern African states cut right through people who share a common ancient history, religion, language, and culture. Okay. And again, those kind of reflect what the Europeans had set up. In addition to the carving up of Africa amongst Europeans, we'll also see imperialism start to occur in East Asia. Notably, Southeast Asia will be taken as colonies by many European powers. You're seeing that on the map here. So the United States will take the Philippines. You can see the Dutch take quite a bit here in what would be Indonesia. French Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, are taken, and you can see Japan actually gets Korea. Japan's a more industrialized nation, so Japan gets in this game of wanting to gather colonies just like Europeans in order to compete. And then, of course, the British are colonizing much of India. Now, China at this time there was fear that China was going to be colonized, that it was going to be carved up by European powers. And this was something actually that the United States was very concerned about. What happened by the year 1900 is that China had started to develop different spheres of influence. So there were different areas in China where these different nations had gathered basically exclusive trading rights, if you will. So all these green areas were places that the British had control. And if you wanted to trade in this area of China, then you really had to be British. And it was not easy to do so if you were from a different country. You can see that there's a sphere of influence that's French, one that's Japanese. There's a little bit of Russian influence, okay? Ultimately, China will not be colonized, but there's some pretty heavy pressure and influence by Westerners and by outsiders during this time period that we can speak of. So that is your other term that I want you to know. Sphere of influence. Here's a formal definition. So a country or area in which another country has power to affect developments, but it has no formal authority. In our examples here, we're going to understand that a sphere of influence is a place, again, where one nation has access or economic control over the nation in terms of markets, in terms of trade. So that is the screencast for this week. Make sure that you've gathered your two definitions. What's important about this unit, and one of the things that I really want you to think about and connect to your previous learning is these questions and prompts here. So in semester one, we learned about the rise of democratic ideals in Europe and the Americas. For example, we learned about the revolutions in France and in Haiti. This idea that men are born with natural rights that shouldn't be violated, that really ultimately we're all created equal, okay, that slavery is wrong. So after all of these changes and all these advancements in terms of rights and in terms of equality, in terms of political thought, how is imperialism justified by European nations in the year 1900? I want you to understand that slavery is abolished, okay, by this period of time, even in the United States. So how do Europeans go out and actually justify conquering all of these other territories and then taking them by force? All right, this is something that we're going to think about as we move forward this week. Thank you so much.